Hi everyone, I'm going to talk to you today about a paper one and how to construct a paper one for IB Economics. The title that I've chosen is using real world examples, evaluate the view that a price ceiling is never effective for stakeholders. Now what I've done on the board here, you may need to just focus in on the different areas, but just here I've got the introduction to my essay. And it's not unique to this particular essay, but for all essays in paper one, you need to be introducing the topic, say what the intention of the essay is. It is not the place for a list of definitions, and you may have been told otherwise. I need to define every term. And so what you often see is just students listing every word in the title. It doesn't come across well. So try and use some prose and narrative in your introduction. Introduce the world example as well. So what I've written here is that governments intervene in markets for a wide variety of reasons, particularly if it feels the market is failing to allocate resources in the most efficient or equitable way. A price ceiling is when the government sets a maximum price that the market can charge for a product, which will be below the equilibrium price. An example of this is rent control in Berlin from 2015 until 2025, where tenants can apply to have their rents reduced. So what you notice in here is I've underlined them in blue. It's a number of I've started to use the terminology of economics. I'm not necessarily giving textbook definitions for every word, but it's very clear in here that I understand what a maximum price is. I've given the economics of it, and I've also used other language in here in explaining my introduction to the essay. I might at the end of this introduction just restate the question. The purpose of this essay is to discuss the extent to which price ceiling is the most or is never effective for stakeholders. I might just mention that at the end, sort of leading me into the next section. So I come across now to my main body and analysis, and again, very often your question is leading you in one direction. This one is suggesting that price ceiling is never effective. So what I'm going to do to begin with is support the question. So my main analysis here is explaining why I can justify using economics that a price ceiling is not effective for stakeholders. I need to explain who stakeholders are, and if I'm going to continue with my example here of rent control, which is as good as any, I'll make a reference to tenants, landlords, and the government being the main stakeholders here. I use a diagram, absolutely essential to put a diagram in, and it's not just enough to draw a diagram, you need to use that diagram effectively in explaining and analysing why the price ceiling will not be effective. So I'm focusing on it not being effective at this stage. Draw my diagram. I indicate there's going to be a shortage of the product likely. So in terms of my stakeholders, there's going to be tenants who do not access a property because the price has been set at this below equilibrium price. Landlords who are not going to get the price that they want for their property. And remember as well that it's not enough just to sort of suggest that landlords are the greedy party here. Landlords have an investment and they're looking for a return on that investment, and if they're not able to receive an adequate return for that money, they'll use the money to invest in something else, where the return is what they want. The government here is not necessarily achieving its objective, which is getting back to my introduction, talking about an equitable distribution of resources. That might not be happening when people are not able to access property. I need to make sure I connect with the real world example. So not everybody in Berlin benefits, even though they've got this rent control, not enough housing as a consequence, and tenants don't know their rights perhaps, and they're not aware of the opportunity to rent out. And if I knew more about my real world example, and the more I know, the better, I might be able to add further details here, because with the Berlin situation, if a property has already previously been rented out at what is considered to be an unfair rent, then the new tenant is not able to access this rent control facility. If the landlord has done upgrades, then again, the rent control doesn't apply. So there's certain conditions that the more I know on the real world example, the better, right? Rather than just giving it a sort of superficial understanding. So I've done my analysis. I'm going to come to my evaluation section, which is the extent to which the question is valid. So I'm considering my counter arguments now. My counter arguments, I don't need too many. Two is enough actually, 3. But what I want is depth. I want quality. I want a discussion to ensue. So if I'm going to mention, one of my counter arguments might be that some tenants will actually receive lower rents. And there will be people who benefit, some stakeholders. Some tenants will access their rent at a lower rate than before. So surely that's a benefit to them. So I'll put that as a counter argument. I'm not just going to put a full stop there. I'm not just going to finish and say that some tenants will get lower rent. I want to discuss that further. Well, who will these tenants be? Who will these people be? It might be that these tenants now are, the landlord is able to discriminate more about who they actually select as tenants. Given a choice, are you likely to select a tenant who has got a stable job, has got job security, is maybe more middle class than perhaps the intention of the policy was to try and encourage people on lower incomes? But maybe those are not the people now that the landlords who can be much more choosy with the tenants that they select. So I'm extending my discussion and I'm further developing my real world example coming back to Berlin to sort of talk about that. So I want, 2 of those is enough as long as I further the development, the extent to which, the circumstances under which it is more or less likely to be true. Finally, I'll come to my conclusion. Nothing new here. I don't want to bring in something that I've not already said. I'm not going to repeat myself either. So I'm probably, in most economics essays, going to end up sitting on the fence. I might just repeat and suggest that there are going to be arguments for and against. There's no real value in my conclusion, so I don't need to dwell on it and worry about it too much, but I do want to sort of finish somewhere and sign off, if you like, on that essay. This is a part B evaluation essay. It's probably taken me 40 minutes to write completely. You could go away and try and write this now using the scaffolding that I provided for you and see if it helps. I hope it does.